Happy Thanksgiving, listeners, and welcome to our 5th bonus episode for the 7 days of Thanksgiving. I hope you're able to gather together with people you love today and eat food that gives you comfort. I also hope you can find something to be thankful for in these rather dark times. I know that for many listeners, a big family Thanksgiving is a day of stress and exasperation, because that one uncle insists that trans people using bathrooms are an existential threat to the country. Or that one cousin who just can't wait for mass deportation so the people who pick the beans in your casserole and pack the turkey on your table. I get it. Half my family's from Mississippi and the other half's from West Virginia, so there are a lot of folks that I don't see eye to eye with politically. Luckily, I get to have Thanksgiving at home in Boston with my chosen family, so I get to set the rules about what we are and are not going to talk about at the dinner table. For those of you who don't have the luxury of hosting and have to navigate a political minefield, you might think that if tempers get out of hand, a Thanksgiving riot might break out. Well, when it comes to Boston history, there's a riot for every season, including the Thanksgiving riot at Harvard in 1787. After the Thanksgiving dinner, Harvard students started smashing furniture and breaking windows, but they weren't rioting over politics or even the quality of the food. Happy Thanksgiving again, and happy listening. A few weeks ago, I was getting myself into the Thanksgiving spirit, and at the same time I was idly browsing through the Mass Historical Society's online Adams papers, as I tend to do. Since the holiday was on my mind, I did a word search for the word Thanksgiving, and turned up a diary entry by John Quincy Adams from February 1st, 1788. I had with Mr. Shaw some conversation upon the subject of the disorders which happened at college in the course of the last quarter. His fears for my brothers are greater than mine. I am persuaded that Charles did not deserve the suspicions which were raised against him, and I have great hopes that his future conduct will convince the governors of the university that he was innocent. A footnote in the collection indicated that on Thanksgiving Day, November 29th, 1787, there had been some sort of disturbance in the Harvard dining hall after dinner. Soon, I found a letter from Elizabeth Smith Shaw to Mary Smith Cranch, which is to say from one of Abigail Smith Adams' sisters to another, from later in February 1788 that mentions the family's troubles. I long to hear from Charles and Thomas. I charged them to write me. I do not know that Mr. Shaw and I could have given them better advice if they had been our own sons. I hope they will conduct agreeable to it and be wiser than they have been and more cautious of abusing government, for what they from choice suffer. The 10 shillings penalty, I mean. So both Charles and Thomas Adams, sons of John Adams and brothers of John Quincy Adams, had been involved in, well, whatever it is that had happened on Thanksgiving. Another student, Pitt Clark, who was a sophomore at the time, kept a diary of his Harvard years. According to his entry from November 29th, 1787, everything that happened at Thanksgiving dinner seems completely normal and above board. Thursday, 29th. Thanksgiving. Very pleasant. Went to meeting. Mr. Hilliard preached from Psalms 107, verses 31 and 32. After meeting, had an elegant dinner in the hall. Each one carried in a bottle of wine, and all joined in drinking toasts and singing songs in praise of the day and with thankful hearts.
That all sounds very prim and proper, but boozed-up college kids in 1787 had a lot in common with college kids today. Maybe Pitt Clark left a few things out of his diary, or maybe he left the dining hall early. But before long, those songs of praise and thankful hearts gave way to drunken rowdiness and destruction of university property. The next week, a meeting was called at Harvard where the president, the professors, and the tutors of the school spent 3 days considering how to react to the disturbance. The minutes of the meeting describe what happened after Clark's account leaves off. It appeared that in a number of the students who dined in the hall on the 29th, being the day of public Thanksgiving, were, after dinner, extremely disorderly and riotous, making tumultuous and indecent noises, breaking the windows of the hall, throwing the benches out of the windows into the yard, etc., which conduct was greatly to the damage and dishonor of the college. Having established the facts, at least the facts as far as the college was concerned, the administration moved on to the topic of punishment. Interestingly, the standard of innocent until proven guilty did not seem to apply before the court of Harvard College. The minutes list a veritable who's who of prominent New England families: Proctors, Coffins, Warrens, Ingalls, Pierponts, Gardners, and Emersons. Then it lays out the punishment that the scions of these famous families would face, saying, all of the above company who did not prove themselves to have left the hall before the riotous proceedings shall be charged in their quarterly bill to repair the damages done in the hall. Among these famous families was a senior referred to as Adams II, and a junior who went by Adams III. That would be Charles and Thomas, as John Quincy, who was Adams first, had already graduated by that point. Also among the list of the punished was Pitt Clark. The Harvard administration met on December 5th, 7th, and 8th. On Saturday, December 8th, Clark wrote in his diary, "Fair and pleasant for the season. After prayers declaimed in the chapel, A.M. read French to our French instructor. Very unexpectedly received from the president and the rest of the government an unjust pecuniary punishment, together with a number of my classmates, for being in the hall at Thanksgiving Day a little while after supper. This pecuniary punishment was 10 shillings, as noted in the letter from Elizabeth Shaw, and further confirmed in the minutes of the administration meeting. Voted that all who are assessed to repair the damages done in the hall be punished by pecuniary fine 10 shillings each. Students who dined in the hall, but who left it before disorders arose to a great height, were excepted by the government from the assessment for repairing the damages."
Charles Adams, along with 3 classmates, was singled out for additional punishment. It's not clear whether he participated in the disorderly and riotous events or not. John Quincy said that he didn't think so in a letter to his cousin Cotton Tufts that February. The riotous, ungovernable spirit which appeared among the students at the university in the course of the last quarter gave me great anxiety, particularly as I understood that one of my brothers was suspected of having been active in exciting disturbances. But from his own declarations, and from the opinion I have of his disposition, I hoped those suspicions were without foundation. I conversed with him largely upon the subject, and hope his conduct in the future will be such as to remove every unfavorable impression. However, with the benefit of historical hindsight, we know that Charles Adams would struggle with alcoholism for most of his life, and eventually die from cirrhosis of the liver when he was just 30 years old. It's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility to think that he already had a taste for wine at the age of 17. His parents were out of the country, and he might very well have gone along with a rowdy crowd. The college administration knew that he'd been in the room because he worked as a waiter in the dining hall. Whether or not he'd actively participated in the disorderly and riotous behavior with his classmates, he was expected to inform on anyone who had. Young Charles, however, lived up to the ancient code of the Harvard student: snitches get stitches. So the administration voted that Adams, Churchill, Emerson, and Waterman, who were waiters, but upon examination did not give such evidence concerning the disorders as the governors were convinced they might have given, be dismissed from their waiterships. Pitt Clark records an attempt at an appeal of their sentence the following Monday. Monday, December 10th. I, together with those who were punished, went to the president to know the justness of it and to desire him to take it off. He promised us another hearing. There was nothing else in his diary about a second hearing. Either it never happened, or the result wasn't worth taking note of. Clark's Harvard diary runs through 1791, and each year's Thanksgiving is noted as uneventful. The biggest news is attending meeting at a new meeting house in Medfield.
The riot seems to have been quickly forgotten by the college, and it may have never been widely known outside the Harvard community, but it cast a long shadow within the Adams family. John Quincy and his mother certainly thought differently of Charles, and to a lesser degree Thomas, after the riot, and they continued to be concerned about Charles's character for months or years afterward. 18 months after the disturbance, John Quincy wrote to his cousin William Cranch in May of 1789 that I am exceedingly gratified that your fraternal advice was given to Mr. Charles, and I flatter myself that it will, with that of his other friends, have a very salutary effect. The disorders at our university gave me much pain, and more especially on finding that my young friend was suspected to be deeply concerned in them. Indeed, I had never felt so much anxiety with respect to him, as some imprudencies, at least, had given countenance to suspicion, that if well grounded, would have deprived him of that reputation which he enjoyed before, and which had given me a pleasure, that I had often announced to his dear parents, and from which they had derived no small satisfaction. That same month, Abigail wrote to John Quincy, asking him to keep a close eye on his younger brothers. I must request you in my absence to attend to your brother Tom, to watch over his conduct and prevent, by your advice and kind admonitions, his falling a prey to vicious company. At present, he seems desirous of pursuing his studies, preserving a character, and avoiding dissipation. But no youth is secure whilst temptations surround him, and no age of life but is influenced by habits and example, even when they think their character is formed. I have many anxious hours for Charles, and not the fewer, for the new scene of his life into which he is going, though I think it will be of great service to have him with his father.
The new scene of Charles's life that Abigail referred to was a move to New York City. At the time, it was the capital of the young United States, and moving there meant that the new graduate would be under his father, the vice president's watchful eye. He was meant to study law under a successful but now mostly forgotten attorney named Alexander Hamilton. But then Hamilton was nominated to President Washington's cabinet, and Charles Adams studied under a different attorney instead. While everyone had high hopes, members of the Adams family didn't have any illusions that being near John would necessarily inspire Charles to mend his ways. A letter to Abigail from her sister Mary alludes to the ignoble fate that would eventually befall Charles Adams some 13 years after the Thanksgiving riot at Harvard. My dear Charles will, I hope, guard against every temptation to evil. Tell him that I love him with an affection little short of what I feel for my own son. Tell him also, if you please, that as he has his companions now to choose anew, that I conjure him by all that is sacred, as he values his reputation among the virtuous and worthy of mankind, as he would not embitter the declining years of his parents and wound the hearts of his friends, to be careful who he admits to call him their friend and associate. To learn more about the 1787 Thanksgiving riot at Harvard, check out this week's show notes at hubhistory.com/107. We'll have links to Pitt Clark's Harvard Diary, to all the Adams family correspondence that we quoted from, and a link to the minutes of the Harvard administration meeting where the students' punishment was determined. Big thanks this week go to Sarah Giorgini, who's the series editor of the Adams Papers at the Mass Historical Society. After I stumbled across that footnote referencing the Thanksgiving riot, she was able to point me to many more references in the Adams Papers that we could use. Thanks also to the folks at the Harvard Archives for finding the minutes for us.